There we go. Well, we're going to begin this morning with a scripture reading from Genesis chapter 12. We'll just read the whole chapter. It has 20 verses. Now the Lord had said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Then Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh. And the Canaanites were then in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. And he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel. And he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. That's the text for today. Now here's the text that we'll have for next week. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, "Indeed I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen, when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you." So it was, when Abram came into Egypt, that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you've done to me? Why did you not tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now therefore here is your wife. Take her and go away." So the Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. So that last story will be for next week. And now we're going to sing hymn number 234. We'll stand to sing hymn 234.
sea, with peace and plenty blessed. A land of sacred liberty and endless rest. Milk and honey flow, and oil and wine abound, and fruits of life forever the mercy crown. Here dwells the Lord our King, the Lord our righteousness, triumphant around and sing the Prince of Peace. On Zion's sacred height, His kingdom He maintains, and glorious with His saints in life forever reigns. The whole triumphant host gives thanks to God on high. Hail, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, may ever cry. Hail, Abram's God and mine, our joint the heavenly days. All might and majesty are and endless praise. Maybe see it.
We're adding more worship elements to the Sunday school time, so we'll iron out some of the changes eventually. So last week we started with Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Now the Lord had said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you." We considered an ancient Jewish opinion recently reintroduced by Pastor Chuck Swindoll, although I discovered this week that actually Spurgeon came up with the same idea too, that Abram was only half obedient to God. In other words, God told Abram not only to leave his country, but to leave his family and his father's house. So according to this theory, Abram should not have allowed his father or brother or nephew to come with him. In other words, they were anchors holding him back and caused him not to do God's will fully. Now we know that Abram left Ur and then stopped in Haran for about 5 years. So Swindoll proposes that his father Terah and brother Nahor stayed in Haran because they wanted to set up idol shops, that they were making idols for people to buy and worship. And so they stayed to make money. And so Abram was delayed 5 years waiting for his family. They held him back. That's this theory. Now there is some possible evidence for it. We looked at Joshua 24, 1-3, because there it says, Joshua says, "Your fathers, including Terah and Abraham and Nahor, served other gods before God called him out of Canaan." So we do know that Abram was, and his father and his brother, they were idol worshipers. And in that region of the world, the place called Aram, the main god for worship was the moon god. And he had many different names. They called him Nanner, they called him Sin. He had lots of different names. But certainly, probably Abram and his father and his brother worshiped the moon. That is until God called him. And even if Joshua didn't tell us that, we also know that a little bit because of the later story of Rachel. Remember when Rachel married Jacob and they fled from Laban's house, she stole the family idols and hid them under her tent. So apparently Laban and Rachel, at least, still loved idols. So Jacob's wife, Rachel, even after being married to him for 7 years, is still not completely converted, unless she had some other motive for stealing them. Maybe she planned to sell them and make some money. I don't really know what her plans were. But we do know that this whole family was full of idol worshipers. What did God mean, though, by telling Abram to leave his family? Did he mean he should abandon his wife? I doubt that, no. Did he mean he should abandon his aging father, who's going to die in a few years? I kind of doubt it. Even if he was an idol worshiper, should you abandon your dad to die? And should you abandon your brother? Well, that's a little easier. Maybe you can abandon your brother. I don't know. But at any rate, and how about Lot? Lot, his nephew, his father just died before they left. So now he's not a kid. He is married and has children. We'll talk about that more next week. But still, he has no father anymore, and he decides to come along with Abram. And it looks like Abram took Lot in, sort of like an adopted, well, not an adopted son. We'll talk about that next week also. So, but here's the question. Did Abram ask any of them to come? It doesn't sound like it. It sounds like he told his dad, God called me to go, and his dad just decided to go along. And when dad decided to go, then all the brothers wanted to come too. So it turned into this big caravan, but I don't think Abram asked them to go. Now then the question is, though, what about stopping in Haran for 5 years? Was it wrong for him to stop in Haran 5 years? My answer is maybe, but probably not, because we looked at Hebrews 11:8. And in Hebrews 11:8 it says, by faith Abram obeyed when he was called to go out of the place which he would receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. So here's the catch. When Abram was in Ur, probably worshiping the moon god, maybe even at that place Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest temple that we've recently been archaeologically uncovering. So he's worshiping the moon god, and the real God talks to him. And he's got to be shocked because the moon god never talked to him. And this God tells him to leave and go somewhere I'm going to show you. But he doesn't tell him where. He doesn't say go to Canaan. He just says go. And so where do they go? They head west. Maybe God told them go west. They went west, and they ended up at Haran. And then his father and brother started whatever they were doing. Maybe his father got sick, but God doesn't tell him where to go anymore. So you're assuming that God told him again, okay, it's time to go to Canaan. And Abram said, no, I'm not going. My dad's sick. It doesn't say that. So there's a whole lot of assumptions in this idea that Abram was disobeying God. In my opinion, it's more likely that God just let him live there until his dad died so that he's finished that end of his familiar relations. And then, by the way, coincidentally, his brother decides not to go, but Lot still wants to go. So he takes Lot. Was it a sin to take Lot? I don't think so. But this is the opinion that many people have now. But what we're learning from Hebrews 11:8 is that God is leading Abram step by step, city by city. God doesn't give Abram a map and say, okay, I want you to go to Shechem, and then I want you to go to Morah, and then I want you to go here. It seems that whenever Abram stops and prays, God tells him the next place to go. This is learning faith. This is how God did it in the wilderness with the Israelites. You remember them wandering around the wilderness? The cloud went, and when the cloud stopped, that's where you camp. I'm guessing that it was the same kind of way with Abram. There probably wasn't a cloud, but God is just telling him step by step where to go. That's my opinion. So then we studied verses 2 and 3 of Genesis 12. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So what was Abram's ambition in life? What did he want most? He wanted kids. His wife Sarai is barren. Now remember, Abram left Ur at age 70, and Sarai, his wife, was 60. She was 10 years behind him. We know that because later Abram says, I'm 100 and she's 90. So we know there's a 10-year difference. Well, she hasn't had any kids yet. Now that wouldn't always be a problem, perhaps, because people are living almost 200 years. So age 60 is not too late to have kids, maybe, for women. It's hard to say. But she's been barren all along. She hasn't had any kids yet. So she's known to be barren. And he wants a son. The most important thing in Middle Eastern life at the time is having children, having a family to remember you by and to continue your line, your name line. And he doesn't have that. So what does God promise him? God promises to make him a great nation. And the word great there, I told you, can have many meanings. But the word definitely in this case must mean great quantity of people. And the reason we know that is because all of the future times when God promises to bless Abram, I'm going to give you as many children as the stars in the heavens. I'm going to give you as many kids as the sand of the seashore. Abram, I'm going to make you great, meaning you're going to have lots of descendants after you. Now, the next phrase is that he and his nation will be a blessing. The world is full of darkness. The flood wiped out all the bad people, mostly, but there's lots more who came. And now the world is again filling with bad people. God's decided, though, he's not going to solve this problem by killing them all anymore. He's just going to create for himself a special people. And so Abram is the first who is going to be separated and holy to himself. It's not that Abram was the first holy guy. Noah was a holy guy, and Enoch, etc. No, what's different is that he will have a sign on him to prove that he is on God's side. And that sign we'll see in a few weeks will be circumcision. That's how people will show themselves to be separate, the males, that is. So why is the world going dark? Remember, one reason is Nimrod. Nimrod, one of the children of Ham, became a tyrant or dictator and took over much of the world, including most of the territory that Shem was supposed to own. And Shem is supposed to be the line of the Messiah. So Nimrod, he probably does this by murder and bloodshed. He's known as a great hunter and a great slaughterer. His nickname is the Great Slaughterer, which kind of implies maybe not just eating meat, but maybe killing people. So Nimrod, though, is foiled by God at the Tower of Babel when he confuses everybody's language. And so he's not able to conquer the whole world. It's kind of hard to conquer the whole world when everybody speaks different languages. So at any rate, the world is still filling up, though, with lots of people who don't worship God anymore. And even Abram from the children of Shem is an idol worshiper. That's not a good sign when the Messianic tribe, only a small part of the Messianic tribe even exists anymore, and Abram is going to become that piece. So here's the problem. Abram is being told by God to move toward Canaan. And he must be thinking, wow, this is a dangerous place. And he starts gathering to himself a small army because it's the only way to survive in a lawless place like Canaan. There are only 2 places on earth at this point that have a civilization. And they're only just starting because the Tower of Babel was only 100 to 200 years before Abram. So what that means is that all these people scattered all over the world and they formed little towns. Only a few places have formed alliances and groups. And those 2 places are Nineveh, which is in Assyria, and Egypt. Those are the only 2 places where you might say there's some law and order. Now, law and order can come through dictatorships. Russia has law and order. North Korea, lots of law and order there. Doesn't make it a nice place. But in the land of Canaan, it would be like moving to Somalia or Chicago. It's a dangerous place to go. You don't want to be there alone. You want to have bodyguards. And so he starts hiring lots of people to go with him. And we'll talk about that more next week also. So Genesis 12:3, though, I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. I'm showing you a little different translation there because the 2 words curse are different. In an English translation, we've got curse and curse. I will curse those who curse you. That's not what it says. It basically says, I will destroy those who dishonor you. I will destroy those who curse you. So it's a much stronger word than just curse. It's not just talking. You're a bad man. I don't like you. Curse, curse, curse. No, it means I'm going to kill you. God says he's going to kill people who harm Abram. God's plan for his people then through Abram is to make them a light. Wherever they go, they will be a light. And that'll especially be true in Canaan, because in Canaan there is nothing but idol worship and lawlessness and banditry. You make your living in Canaan at this time. If you're not a farmer, you're a thief. You just go steal whatever other people have made. And so in order for Abram to protect himself and his family, he builds quite a large caravan. So now today we're going to, oh, by the way, that is a type of the church. The church is a beacon of light in the darkness. So now we study verses 4 through 9, Genesis 12, verses 4 through 9, but we'll just start with verses 4 through 6. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Then Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh. And the Canaanites were then in the land. I kept saying we're going to talk about these next week. That's because I prepared next week's lesson already, since I'm going to be gone all week. We're actually going to cover a lot of that today. I'm a week ahead. But these verses I covered a lot last week when we talked about Acts chapter 7. Acts 7 told us that Abram's first calling was to leave, and he did with his whole family, whether he asked them to come or not. Now it appears that God has spoken to Abram again and told him it's time to leave Haran. Your dad's dead now. Your brother doesn't want to come anymore. Time for you to get moving again. And he does. And it appears that Abram has kind of adopted Lot, not as a son, but sort of like a godparent or a guardian. So when God said Abram should leave his family and his father's house, I don't think it meant to drop Lot, just as it didn't mean to drop his wife. But there's a number of implications in these verses. For one thing, Abram got rich while he spent several years in Haran. It says that he took his family and all their possessions that they had gathered and the people whom they acquired in Haran. Now, this can be taken badly by liberals and skeptics because they say, look, Abram bought lots of slaves and he dragged them away with his caravan. He was a slave owner, death to the tyrant, all that sort of thing we get these days. That's not what it said. I want you to be remembering that slavery as practiced by the Jews was not like American slavery or British slavery from the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. It was not kidnapping and lifetime servitude, and it did not include wives and children unless the servant's family wished it. We would call it indentured servitude rather than slavery in the strict sense. In other words, let's say you lived in Haran and Abram is in town, and you've got debts and you can't pay them. You can go to Abram, who's a fairly rich guy, and say, I've got debts. If you'll pay these debts for me, I'll be your servant for 7 years. And after 7 years, they'll write a contract. And after 7 years, I'm free. And his wife and kids are not a part of the contract unless Abram leaves and he needs to take his wife and kids. And if he has to take his wife and kids, they have to amend the contract to say, I'm bringing my wife and kids. If you'll feed them, I'll give you an extra couple of years. Because, you don't want to leave your wife and kids behind. So that's what happened. You voluntarily chose to become a servant to pay your debts. That's what you did back then. And if your contract expired, let's say you've covered your 7 years and you've done all your work, if you like your boss and you like the work you're doing and you don't have any other prospects in mind, you can say, I would like to be your servant forever. I'd like to stay with your house. I like being here. And my family likes being here. And if you do that, they take you over to the tent peg, the main pole that holds up your tent, and they put your ear up against it, and they take a nail, or an awl, I should say, not a nail, a sharp hammer, and they poke a hole in your ear like you're getting your ear pierced. And that means I am forever part of this house. I've chosen that. So it's voluntary. It's not the evil kind of slavery we practice. And if the family wants to stay, they can. Otherwise, they just sign contracts. We'll keep working for you, and you help us too. So I just want you to remember when it says that they acquired people in Haran, it does not mean that they grabbed people and stuck chains on them and dragged them away. Nothing like that. So now turn over to Genesis 15. We're going to learn about Abram's chief servant. His name is Eliezer. Genesis chapter 15, verses 2 through 4. But Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? Then Abram said, look, you've given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. So this is 3 chapters later, and it's about 10 years later. So after another decade of being childless, Abram says to God, you haven't fulfilled your promise. You told me I'm going to be a great nation. Right now, my chief servant is my heir. So notice a couple of interesting things about this. First of all, his name, the man's name, is Eliezer of Damascus. And secondly, Abram says that Eliezer was born in his house, meaning in Abram's tent. Well, the first clue, the Damascus thing. This is a clue to Abram's homeland. If and Haran are in northern Syria, this would be very close to Damascus, which is where Eliezer's family comes from. So this is another clue that the idea of being in the south by Babylon is not correct. Another interesting ancient Jewish midrash claims that Eliezer was a child of Nimrod, or a descendant of Nimrod. But there's no evidence for that. I'm not sure. I'm guessing that the Jews might have made that up, if they made it up, based on the idea that God's people rule over the wicked. We don't really know that that's true, but there's no indication of that. Okay, but the bigger question is, why would a servant be born in Abram's house, in his tent? I mean, is that normal? If you've got a servant that they have their babies in your tent, why don't they have their babies in their own tent? That's an interesting question. It's not because he was born a slave, or at least that was not supposed to happen. I just told you the way slavery was supposed to work. Now, it is, of course, possible that wicked people were enslaving others and their babies, just like we've done in the United States in the 19th century. But then I don't think that's true, because then why would Abram say that he's the heir? If he was born in chains and born a baby slave, why would he be Abram's heir? That doesn't make any sense. That's one reason to believe he was not a slave. He was a trusted, loyal, lifetime servant. For one thing, his name may be important. Eliezer means help from my God. And how do we know that? Turn over to the book of Exodus. There's a really interesting piece here in Exodus you may have not noticed. I never noticed it before. Exodus 18, verses 2 through 4. Strangely enough, Moses named his second son Eliezer. Same name. Exodus 18, 2 through 4. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back with her 2 sons, of whom the name of one was Gershom, for he said, I've been a stranger in a foreign land, and the name of the other was Eliezer, for he said, the God of my father was my help, and he delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Now this brings up an interesting new thing about Moses' life that we haven't noticed before. When Moses first left for Egypt, you remember the burning bush. Jesus told him out of the burning bush to go save his people in Egypt. And he drug his heels and he waited and paused, and God said, get going. So he went on his way. And do you remember the strange incident where they camped for the night, and while they were in their tent, an angel came to kill Gershom. That's Moses' firstborn son. Because Moses never circumcised him. Here's the leader. God wants Moses to be the leader of Israel, and Moses has not circumcised his firstborn son, and God's angry about this. He sends an angel to kill the kid. Zipporah sees the angel standing there ready to kill her son. So she takes a sharp rock and she circumcises her son. And she takes the bloody piece and throws it at Moses and said, you're a husband of blood to me. This is a really strange story in the Bible. So Gershom almost died at the hands of an angel. Zipporah saved him. But what's interesting is, after that, we don't hear anything else about Zipporah or Gershom in all the story at Egypt. Moses goes to Egypt and they're never mentioned. The next time we hear about them is when Daddy, her father, brings Zipporah and the kids to meet Moses at Mount Sinai. My belief then is that when the angel almost killed his son, Moses said, okay, it's time for you guys to go home to Dad. This is going to be a dangerous trip. I don't know what this crazy God's going to do. Is he going to kill me? Is he going to kill our sons? Is he going to kill my wife? Moses sends them home. And they go home to Jethro, and now Jethro brings them back. But it's interesting, when he gets to see his new son, I'm guessing he hasn't seen him yet. He's been in Egypt for months. And while he's in Egypt, it appears that a new boy was born, and his name was named Eliezer. But I'm guessing that Moses named him. And we know that because it says his name was Eliezer because the God of my father was my help, and he delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Who got delivered from the sword of Pharaoh? Moses. So my guess is he had seen Gershom, and he also saw him die, but he hadn't seen. So I'm guessing Zipporah was pregnant when this thing happened with the angel. And when she went home, then she had another boy named him Eliezer. Now, did he name him Eliezer after remembering the servant of Abram? Maybe. It's interesting that it's the same name. But that's why we know what the name means, Eliezer. So at any rate, Eliezer's name means help from God. When did Eliezer get his name? Well, it probably wasn't. It was probably a new name. Because if all of them were moon worshipers, you wouldn't name your servant helper of the God Elohim. Because you don't even know who the God Elohim is, right? So I'm guessing that he was a good servant all along, and that when Abram now is converted to Elohim, his servant is converted to Elohim. And now he calls his servant my servant from Elohim, or my servant from my God. So I'm guessing it's a new name. Okay, the other question, though, is why is he from Damascus? Maybe Eliezer's father was a loyal and happy servant of Abram and brought his family along, and now the older servant is possibly dead, but his son takes over as a servant. Maybe. That's one possibility. However, there is another possibility that's even more likely. That phrase, born in the house or born in the tent. This is a topic of debate because it's only used a few times in the Bible. let alone in Genesis. So let's look at Genesis 17, 12, and 13 to see another important way of understanding this phrase, born in your house, born in the house. Genesis 17, verses 12 through 13. This is the command to circumcision. We'll get here in a couple of months. He who is 8 days old among you shall be circumcised, every male child in your generations. He who is born in your house or bought with money from any foreigner who is not your descendant. He who is born in your house and he who is bought with money must be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. Now, I want you to notice that twice that phrase, he who is born in your house, is paired with he who is bought with your money. God already spoke of, in earlier verses in this chapter, God already told Abram, you will circumcise everyone you're related to, everyone who's traveling with you. Okay, in other words, all of your kids or all of your servants' kids. But now he says, you also need to, anyone who is born in your house or bought by your money. In other words, every male in your whole entourage has to be circumcised. And so many people believe that born in your house means adopted. In other words, it's a slang. It doesn't mean that literally, necessarily, Eliezer was born in the tent. It just means that you've adopted him as a loyal lifetime servant. And then the other phrase, bought with your money, means he's a new guy. He's not a lifetime servant. He's contracted to you. But if you contract a servant to you, he's got to be circumcised too. So I tend to believe that this is a correct way of explaining it. So I'm not sure. Eliezer might have been born in Abram's tent, but here's a reason to believe that this must mean adopted and why it can't mean they were all born in his tent. Turn over to Genesis 24, verses 11 to 14. This is where it becomes pretty obvious that born in your house can't mean born in your tent. Oh, no, that's not the right text. I guess I'll get to that later. Sorry, I'm out of order. It's interesting. We're back to Eliezer being loyal. We will get to the other question soon. Eliezer is loyal to Abram. Consider a couple of things. Let's say you're a servant of Abram and you're traveling down to Canaan. And in chapter 17, God says, okay, all of you guys have to get circumcised now. You got to be a pretty loyal servant to be willing to stick around for that, right? You're going to get circumcised if you stay. So now turn over to Genesis 24. We read a few verses of this a week or two ago, but Eliezer was sent to find a wife for Isaac, and this is proof of his loyalty. Let's look at his personal speech. You know, Eliezer is one of the few servants in the Bible who actually gets quoted. He gets to talk in the Bible. So here it is in Genesis 24, 11 to 14. This is Eliezer. He made his camels kneel down outside the city by a well of water at evening, the time when women go out to draw water. Then he said, O Lord God of my master Abraham, please give me success this day and show kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, here I stand by this well of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now let it be that the young woman to whom I say, please let down your pitcher that I may drink, and she says, drink, and I will also give your camels a drink. Let her be the one you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master. Now, there's a lot of things that are pretty obvious about this speech. First of all, Eliezer is no longer worshiping the moon god. He's worshiping the true God, and he's praying to the God of Abraham. And he even trusts him. He asks for a sign to help him find a good wife for Isaac. And then when Rebekah fulfills his sign, look at his answer in verses 26 and 27. So what does he do when Rebekah does what he asked God to have her do? Then he bowed down his head and worshiped the Lord. And he said, blessed be the Lord God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his mercy and his truth toward my master. As for me, being on the way, the Lord led me to the house of my master's brethren. So when God answered Eliezer's prayer, Eliezer bowed down and worshiped, and he blessed God. And what did he bless God for? For helping his master and for helping him. He still cares about his master. He's not just a hanger-on because the money's good. He really wants what's best for Abraham. He is loyal and unselfish. And think about how loyal this is. If anyone who lived in Abram's tent or in his caravan wouldn't want Abram to have more children, who would it be? It would be Eliezer. Because until Ishmael was born and Isaac was born, Eliezer was going to inherit all of it. Now, wouldn't you be a little angry or a little jealous or a little upset when Abram starts having sons and you're cut out of the will? That would probably bug me a bit. So this shows that Eliezer is completely selfless. He doesn't even mind that he's out of the inheritance. In fact, he's asking that God would give Isaac children now, so he'll have grandchildren. Because if Isaac doesn't have any children, then would he inherit? So anyway, he's really loyal to Abram and to God. You see, there was a tradition in ancient Semite families that the owner of the house must name a male servant as a backup inheritor in case his sons died or if he had no sons. The reason is you want families to always be sturdy. I hate to compare it to the mafia, but you want to have a succession of guys. So if the godfather dies, there's another guy ready to take over because you don't want La Familia to break up. It's the same way in Semitic family. So even if Abram had a child through Sarai, he still has to name a backup plan in case the kid dies. And he named Eliezer, but at this point, Abram has no kids. And so Eliezer is the main inheritor at this point. Now, this also shows that Abram trusted Eliezer a lot. If you trust someone to take over your family and be good to your wife and all the rest of your servants, you must really trust him. Now, we don't know how Abram got rich in Haran. If his father and brother did set up idol shops, I'm sure he didn't get rich selling idols because Abram no longer believes in idols. It's just that God blessed Abram in everything he did. Now, as for the people he acquired in Haran, he did pick up new servants. And I propose that a lot of them were soldiers or strong young men. Why? Maybe now God is telling Abram where to go. He's telling him to go southwest. And if you go southwest from Haran, where do you go? You go to Canaan, a dangerous place. So he is going to hire a bunch of guys to protect his family and his caravan. Who lives in Canaan? The son of Ham named Canaan and all of his wicked kids. These are wicked and depraved men. They have no major authority structures. Each town or city is run by a warlord, and they live on raiding other people. The law is whatever you say it is. And Abram knows that in order to be safe, he's going to need a small army. And how many people are we talking about? Now we'll talk about his army. Go over to Genesis 14:14. Now this is after Abram's arrived, but this tells us how big his army is. Lot moves to Sodom and his family, and they're all living in Sodom, and they all get captured. An alliance of Amorite kings from the north invade and capture Sodom, and they take Lot and his family away. And Abram is going to save him. So look at Genesis 14:14. Now, when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, okay, I want you to notice that. He calls him his brother, even though he's only his nephew. I think this shows that he has adopted him like a brother, not like a son. But his brother was taken captive. He armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house and pursued them to Dan. All right, so now we know Abram has at least 318 servants trained in war who were born in his house. So do you think that Abram shared his tent over all these years and they literally bore 318 children on the floor of his tent? I don't think so. Doesn't sound right. Also, if they were born on the floor of his tent in, say, Haran, it's only been 10 years. They're not old enough to carry swords yet. These are more reasons to believe that it means adopted. It does not mean they were born in his tent. That's my point. These are people who are now lifelong servants volunteering to serve Abram. And he's got at least 318. That's a pretty good sized little army. I mean, it's not huge, but it's big enough to protect him from the locals in Canaan at any rate. So what this means is that Abram probably had at least 1,000 to 2,000 people in his caravan. I mean, if you've got 318 trained soldiers and they have wives and maybe kids, and maybe they brought their parents along, you're talking about a lot of people. hundreds at least, probably at least 1,000. It was like a mobile town. It'd be like moving an aircraft carrier around in the desert, 1,000 people. So now go to Genesis 12:6. Abram passed through the land to the land of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh. I'm wondering if it's on this map. I didn't look. Shechem is somewhere near Ai. It should be somewhere around here. I don't see Shechem on here. There's Bethel. We'll get to Bethel. But at any rate, Abram has now moved from Damascus area, Haran, here's Haran, gone down through past the Sea of Galilee, and he's going south toward the Dead Sea. And he's down in this area. And he's up on one of the tall mountains not too far from Jerusalem. Shechem was actually in the neighborhood of Sychar. You remember what happened at Sychar? Anybody remember? The woman at the well. That's where Jesus met the woman at the well. So slightly north up here in Samaria in the future. Now, why did Abram stop there? Maybe God told him to. But the other thing we're told is that the Canaanites were there in the land. Why does it say that? Probably to remind the people who are reading the book of Genesis that there's lots of wicked people there. The Canaanites throughout the Bible are known as some of the most wicked people on earth. We will know them later in the time of Joshua and even later of people who sacrifice babies to idols and do all kinds of atrocities to each other as well. The Canaanites were wicked. And that's one of the reasons God destroys them in the book of Joshua. Remember also that in the time of Joshua, 500 years later, the Jews were afraid to go in. Why were they afraid to go into Canaan when they're standing across the Jordan? What did they see that scared them? Giants in the land, yes. They said the cities were heavily fortified and there are giants, the descendants of the Anakim, which seem to be kind of like the Nephilim. And the Philistines were also there. And you remember the Philistines had some giants too, like Goliath. Now, by this time, when Moses and Joshua were there, the Hittites were also a big power in Canaan. So it was no longer just run by warlords. There were big, powerful city-states with armies. Now, during Abram's time, there were probably some giants there too, but they haven't yet organized and formed big armies. So it might be a fearful thing for Abram, who is 75 years old with only a few hundred armed men. If a few cities united and attacked him, they would be much bigger than his army. So what does God do? Now look at Genesis 12:7-9. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. And he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. So Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. Now, why would Abram be told by God to go up on the mountain? There's a huge mountain here. Why would he go up there? Probably because God will send him there to this mountain many times. And what will he say? He will say, "This is all going to be your land, Abram. Everything you can see and more. It's going to go as far as the sea. It's going to go as far as Lebanon. It's going to go as far as Egypt. And it's going to go as far as Babel in the east. I mean, you're going to have all this land. You're going to see it." So he's reminding Abram of his promise. He sends him up to a mountain. Abram sacrifices and God shows him the land. And then Abram and his caravan go south and they built another altar. And this is going to be at the same place where Joshua will come 500 years later before he destroys the city of Ai. Joshua is going to come to the same mountain. So Abram kept heading south. Why is he heading south? We'll see next week. So do you have any questions, comments about Abram heading into Canaan? All right, then we'll close in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for your word and all the things you're showing us about Abram and also his wonderful servant Eliezer. May we all learn from their example and be faithful to you and recognize that you don't always share your whole will with us. And sometimes you'll just take us step by step and day by day. Amen. So we'll pick up with the main worship service in about 45 minutes. And it doesn't appear to have cut off. Looks like